Welcome back to Quick Take Charge. I'm Tim Stenovic.
And I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in New York. President Joe Biden will meet privately at the White House today with the family of George Floyd, 1 year after his murder. The meeting comes as negotiators working on policing legislation in Congress are still stuck on how to hold law enforcement officers accountable for excessive use of force. Biden had hoped legislation bearing Floyd's name would be passed by the anniversary of his death. Joining us now by phone is Bloomberg News congressional reporter Laura Litvan. She is on Capitol Hill for us today. So, Laura, can you first talk to us about qualified immunity? This is the holdup that lawmakers are having right now. Just explain to us what exactly it is first.
It's a legal doctrine that shields police officers from being ordered by a court to pay damages when they're sued for violating someone's constitutional or legal rights. In the way it's been implemented is often if a police officer faces a civil case, the circumstances need to be almost completely similar to some other case that already successfully went through the courts. Or often that is shielding them in ways that police reform proponents feel it goes too far. They don't end up having to pay the damages. Last year, you may recall that legislation collapsed in the Senate over policing reform legislation. The Republican Senator Tim Scott had a very broad-based bill, but it didn't include that. And the House, which was governed by Democrats at the time and still is, passed a tougher bill that included a provision that would end that legal doctrine, the qualified immunity. And outside groups pushed Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer to let the bill, to block the bill, because the Senate bill, because it didn't have the provision in it. So it's been a big sticking point.
Why is it such a sticking point? I mean, you mentioned Tim Scott, but even it seems like among Democrats, there's still a little bit of division on whether or not to keep this qualified immunity as a part of this bill.
Well, we had, an interesting thing happen, which is House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn, one of the highest-ranking black lawmakers in Congress, did say recently that maybe the best thing to do would be to drop it in these negotiations because there's so many other good things in the bill, and it could keep a bipartisan deal from occurring. In the Senate, the Democratic whip Dick Durbin suggested that he could support a compromise that Tim Scott, the Republican, has put forward in talks that he's having on legislation that would let victims' families sue police departments rather than the police officers themselves. And Scott makes the point that, those police departments would have deeper pockets anyway. So Durbin has said he might be able to support that. So we're going to have to see what happens.
Well, I wonder about the difference between a potential bill like this on the federal level, while at the same time we have local and state regulations about what police can and cannot do. Take us through differences there and potentially what it would mean for a federal bill at this level.
Well, I think what they're trying to do is to put as much influence of some federal standards on departments as they possibly can. Like one approach is, it was in a House-passed bill this year, is to have a federal database to track use of force incidents involving state and local police officers and withhold some federal funds from those that don't participate. We're seeing the Senate bill last year had provisions that would also withhold funds for departments that didn't meet certain standards and try to use the federal funds as a way to influence whether you ban chokeholds of suspects and no-knock warrants, some of those types of things. One thing we are seeing right now is these talks that are going on involve not only Scott, but Democratic Senator Cory Booker and Representative Karen Bass, a Democrat from California, and they are making some progress in some areas. Nothing's on paper yet or final, but negotiators are looking at limiting the transfer of some military equipment to local police departments, setting some federal standards for no-knock warrants, and banning the use of chokeholds except in life-threatening situations. The qualified immunity issue remains an outstanding one. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell says he does not want to see a bill. He would not support a bill if it had that provision in it, ending the qualified immunity for individual officers. And that's important because this is a 50-50 Senate, and they will need 10 Republicans to get past any filibuster. And another issue that remains on the table is when you can prosecute a police officer for violating someone's civil rights on the criminal side, where they could be subjected to to having to pay a fine or to go to prison. The Democrats want to lower the standard, the threshold in the federal criminal code that could allow someone to be prosecuted. And for Tim Scott, so far he's saying that's a red line. So we're going to see how they resolve that.
So, Laura, given all of that and sort of the holdups that you walked us through, and given the fact that lawmakers have missed this deadline that President Biden set, how does this get through? You know, do lawmakers actually feel the pressure to actually pass a bill this time? I mean, or are they hoping? I know they're not in session right now. Are they hoping, this maybe just goes away? I mean, I'm curious what it's like on Capitol Hill.
Well, I get the sense, I've been outside the room when they've had these discussions in recent weeks, and they really gained more urgency after Derek Chauvin, the Minneapolis police officer who was found guilty of second-degree murder and lesser charges for cutting off George Floyd's air supply. They took on a new sense of urgency at that time, and they're occurring almost daily. The House is out of session this week. The Senate is in. Bass, the Democratic House member, has stayed in town to continue the talks, and they're all sounding pretty optimistic that they can come up with a deal. This is in contrast to some of the other key Biden objectives that are in bipartisan negotiations right now that seem more bogged down to me, like negotiations over new gun controls, background checks for certain gun purchases, and also for immigration reform.
Laura, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us from Capitol Hill. That's Bloomberg congressional reporter Laura Litvin on Capitol Hill. Thanks again. Well, coming up next, how the racial wealth gap reached a point where white Americans have amassed almost 7 times more wealth than black Americans. We're back in 2 minutes. This is Quick Take Charge.